This is Main Street with Gary Allen. Now, here's Gary.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to Main Street. Yes, indeedy, I am Gary Allen. I'm glad to see all of you since the last time we were together. We've got a gigantic show for you today with one of the most fabulous comedy writers, actors, and just a really great gentleman to have on the program. So let's get to it. And by the way, I hope everybody's had a wonderful time since the last time we spoke. And whoever you're picking for the Super Bowl, I hope you come out ahead, whichever side of the barn you're going to be on. My guest is a writer, songwriter, actor, two-time Emmy Award winning writer for his Academy Award writing endeavors. He's also written for the Oscars, the Emmys, the Tonys, the Grammys. He's been nominated many, many times for awards for those particular shows. He's also written for television, Broadway, and film projects, all the way from Paterson, New Jersey, to Broadway, to LA. Would you please welcome, and with his great acting ability today, he's playing Travis Kelce's mother. Would you please welcome Mr. Bruce Vilanch?
And you see, I've got the look nailed. That's mine, one or the other. We can't figure out. It started last year at the Super Bowl, where people began calling me, saying, "Dude, what are you doing at the Super Bowl with Taylor Swift?" And I said, I had no idea what they were talking about, because I watched the Super Bowl for the halftime, basically. And so I tuned in, and there was Donna Kelce sitting there, and I said, "Oh my God, that's me." We even have the same hairstyle.
Well, so now you can go. Now you can go into lookalike business. Yes, now you can go into the lookalike world as Donna Kelce's lookalike. See if you can pick up a few shillings.
Exactly right. Just about it. If there were still shillings, to pick them up.
Before we get into the LA fires, we talked briefly just before we went on the air. Yeah, it's a great segue. The awards ceremony last night for the Emmys. Number one, I didn't recognize.
It was the Grammy. Huh? I know you're Grammy, but it was the Grammys, not the Emmys.
Okay, the Grammys. Sorry about that, folks. I didn't recognize but a half a dozen people for the entire evening. And then when it came time for the memorial aspect of it, the people that have left us this past year, they put a guy in a piano with a bunch of other people. They keep the camera on him a little bit here, a little bit there, instead of just putting some nice music up and letting the pictures on the stage go by. I mean, I was shocked. I didn't know Dickie Betts had passed away. I didn't know that my friend Tito Jackson had passed away, along with some others that were up there. When did the evolution of this thing start? Because I know it's on all the award ceremonies. Why do they do that?
Well, first of all, let me point out the reason you didn't know half of the people on the show is because you're an old fart like me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The Grammys are now dominated by the youth market. As in fact, the recording industry has always been dominated by the youth market. So people who watch award shows don't necessarily know who the people are who are known by the people who buy records or downloads, whatever it is now. So that's a common complaint. And the Grammys, there's nothing they can do about it because they're honoring the artists of the year. Now, the death reel, as we call it at the Oscars, or the Late Show, or sometimes we call it The Departed, happened with Alan Carr. The first Oscar show I wrote in 1989, a very flamboyant producer named Alan Carr produced it, and he thought it was a wonderful thing because he lived a lot of his life in the Hollywood past. He thought that it would be a great thing to honor people who were from Hollywood who had passed in the past year. And it started, and it was so popular among the industry, who were like clamoring to get their relatives into the reel, that it became a thing that all the other shows imitated, picked up on, stole, and did from that then on. And there's always been a raging debate over how many people can be included and who they are and who makes that decision, and also how it's showcased. Now, the guy at the piano was Chris Martin, who was the lead singer of Coldplay, of whom you may have heard. And
yes.
If for no other reason than he was married to Gwyneth Paltrow and had 2 kids, and is currently going with Dakota Johnson, who is the daughter of Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith.
Yeah.
So it's
Yes.
all a fabulous Joni Mitchell kind of circle game. So that is the simplest way to do it. You want to have some kind of music that celebrates, but is not too celebratory. Celebrates, but is solemn enough. And so they try, when they have a vocalist that pulls focus from the images on the screen of the departed. So here's a guy, he was singing, but he was sitting at a piano singing. And I thought it was very tastefully done, the screens behind him and all of that.
Yeah.
And, it's become ritual. And if you try to, everybody bitches about it, but if you tried to cut it, they would scream even louder because they want to be in it when they go.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
The family, I mean, I can't tell you how families lobby. Not shortly after somebody dies, you begin getting calls saying, are they going to be in the reel? I mean, it's one of those obscene things that somebody, SNL will do a sketch about sooner or later, but
yeah,
pretty much. They haven't gotten to it. But it is really, it's truly astonishing. And the way they parse who's actually in there. I thought it was pretty well done last night. And then, of course, there's always the shock moment where somebody that you didn't realize was gone is gone. Somebody who you were friends with but hadn't spoken to in a while is no there.
The same with me. The same with me. Same with me. I hadn't talked to Tito in 20 years. I mean, when I lived in Las Vegas, he'd come and visit his brothers. I didn't know that he passed. Now, I kind of knew that Dickie Betts had passed away, and I knew some of the other people had passed away, but I didn't realize that, my cat has decided to come and pay us a visit. But I didn't realize that Dickie had really passed. And so I would, it kind of, and there always is, you're right, somebody or something that you go, whoa, they really passed away. Wow. And stuff like that. I'm surprised they didn't have others on there. But anyway, from that, I want to talk about, because as we were discussing before the show, my old neighborhood, which is kind of where you are in the hills, because I was on La Brea and Franklin there at the Franklin Astoria, that fabulous apartment complex that the curtains were half gone. We had no heat, no air conditioning. You kind of went through it back in the old days. The fires in LA. Now, there's been a lot said about it. The guy in the White House says, we've opened up the valves now and the water's flowing from the north to the south.
But it's not flowing to LA.
No.
They opened up the valves. I mean, it's an empty gesture.
Yeah. Well, then they didn't really open up any valves. Of course, the congenital liar that the man is, he keeps saying that they're doing this, doing that. How close did it come? I understand you had to evacuate.
I had evacuated. I was the fire was right above where you were living, but I mean, not farther up the mountain, up those hills. And it was a minor fire, it was not Eaton or Palisades. It was called Runyon, and it was small, and it was put out quickly because they got some choppers in the air before the winds were so intense that you couldn't put anything in the air. And that's how the perfect storm was created. You can't put out 1,000 house fires at once at the same time with just hoses on the ground. No. It's always with air support. When the air support isn't there, the hoses have to do twice the work. So, of course, they run out of water because the system is not designed for that. Because guess what? This has never happened before.
Yeah.
And it was not anticipated that it would happen like this. So it was a perfect storm.
Yeah, it was. And
not a plan for this.
I mean, there are people to blame, and there will be people to blame and all this other stuff. A lot of people that you and I both know have lost their homes in LA. I know that Jimmy Woods was on TV crying about losing his home until he found out he didn't. Yeah, he didn't. But our dear friend Harlan, who is an agent in LA, both you and I know him very, very well. He lost his home, and his kitty is still lost. Yeah. And it's going to take, and to think of the Pacific Palisades and parts of Pasadena and other areas that I know well, and of course you know extremely well, that are gone, it's going to take, 80, 90 years probably to rebuild to even get close to what that was.
Yes. I mean, why not? That's a good estimate. I have no idea. I think it'll come back as fast as it can, which is if they can expedite reconstruction and all of that. But it's never going to be exactly the way it was. But
no. And all the insurance companies pulling out.
San Francisco and say 100 years later, but it didn't take as long after the San Francisco.
But it's going to take a while because people's lives have been ruined, not only their homes, but where they work, jobs, other things are involved here. And it's going to be, I mean, our hearts and go out to all these people. And again, having lived in that area, I know what it's like, and it's a beautiful, beautiful area altogether. I mean, it really, really is.
Is kind of underwritten because it was always it was less expensive. It was a traditionally black area that became integrated with outliers, with a lot of people from the industry. Below the line people, crew people, designers, costumers, things like that, people like that, who built great houses in Altadena. And so it was an interesting community next to Pasadena, which was much more high tone, but Altadena had a really bohemian quality to it. And that's really sad because they're not by and large famous. Where the Palisades was loaded up with rich and famous. So,
yes, absolutely. Well, and my buddy Kevin Costner, I think he said his home burnt. I think I saw something to that effect. In Pasadena.
It used to be in La Cañada, Flint Ridge. I don't know if they had a fire there too. So he's had a few houses.
Yeah, and a few wives along the way too.
There you go.
Well, hey, I met him along with Saget. Of course, I knew Bob at the Groundlings when we were both attending and going to school there. You and I share something that I want to cover. You and I are both adopted children, and you and I were both adopted within the 3 or 4 days of our birth.
That is true.
Did you go through a period? I went through a period a little bit later in life when I hit my 50s, where in your mind you're going, something missing here. There's a void here. I tried to find out who my real parents.
My parents always told me I was special because that was to dodge the sex conversation. So I grew up thinking, I'm special, but I had the usual teenage angst in which I decided, like all teenagers, well, I don't belong here. In my case, I had a case. I could actually say to them, "You didn't make me." So back then, you couldn't find out about anything until you were 21. But my father tried to find out, and we hit a brick wall. And when I was 21 in college, he called me and said, you could find that out now. And I said, I don't really care that much. I'd gotten over that phase. And I thought, I want to find out. I come from a long line of people who dropped dead at 40. This I need to hear. So, and I said, I kind of enjoyed having no medical history. Whatever a doctor, have a medical history. I told that story to my doctor a few weeks ago, and he said, at your age, you are your medical history. So it didn't seem to matter. Okay, so then LAP dissolved to when I was in my 50s. And I was curious only because there was an explosion of people you could, with DNA and spitting into a cup and all that, you could find out. Mm-hmm. But my father had died when I was 30, and my mother, who I knew, while she would pretend it was okay with her that I was doing that, on some level would be deeply hurt. And because I knew my mother. And so I said I wouldn't do it until she was gone. Well, she lived to 95. Her joke was, the first 90 years are easy. The second 90 are a bitch. So she was herself to the end. And after she died, I spit into a cup. And 7 years later, my birth family showed up on one of Ancestry or 23andMe. But so, I mean, I had a certain curiosity as I got older, but I had set up that roadblock. I mean, I just knew I wasn't going to do it, and then finally I did it, and now the outcome has been phenomenal. I have this great family. They are so great. I mean, I just went to my niece's wedding, and I've been to my other niece's graduation, and it's kind of, I'm celebrity Uncle Bruce. So there's something about that. But even if I wasn't, I think they're just very warm, open, accepting people, and they don't need anything from me. They got their own money. They got their own, I don't need anything from them. Thank God. That's that's good.
Yeah. I have my original birth certificate, and I'm Greek by birth, and I know what my original name was, and thank God my mother had the common sense to change it from Philip to Gary, But the last name, Bruce, is Pappas, which is as common as Smith. And when my baby brother, who's a Greek Orthodox priest up in Boston, contacted a Greek priest in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where I was born, it was a dead end, and even with the state of Pennsylvania. And the only reason I wanted to find out was any medical history. That was it. And of course, I wish I would have known about the glaucoma beforehand, but glaucoma is glaucoma. They don't know if it comes. And as you know, because of your dad was an optometrist, you don't know if it comes from inherited problem or whether it comes from the back of the eyes, how they're shaped, et cetera, et cetera. So, it was like, and my mother told me always, you can go and look. But the minute I stopped looking and went, you know what? I was born in 1952. Say the girl was 17 or 18 years old. It's now 2000 and what? She'd be 90 years old, if she was still alive. And I moved on. And the minute I moved on, suddenly I felt this rain cloud leave me.
You mean it wasn't Irene Pappas?
No.
Gee, I was so hoping. That was a big... For those of you who don't remember Irene, she was a brilliant Greek actress who was on in movies and on Broadway, and she was like, if you can picture the Statue of Liberty with humor, that was Irene Pappas.
Yes,
very strong.
I never, and I've never, two things I've never dated: a redhead and a Greek girl. Never. And my mother was a redhead, and I adored my mother and father. They were very good to me. My mother's an interior designer, but she swore she thought she knew who my birth mother was. They owned a Greek restaurant in downtown Wilkes-Barre, and it's a long story, but nevertheless, I can't tell you how many of these stories I hear now from other people. Yeah, my mother was adopted too,
my
and
grandmother used to say, "You don't have to tell people you're adopted," because I was that great. I thought I was special, and I realized from her that there was a stigma at the time to being adopted, and of course that's all has now gone away because we have blended families and a million different things. But it was never presented to me that way. So my parents were very smart.
Yeah, Bruce Vilanch is joining us. He's portraying Travis Kelce's mother today here on Main Street. Gary Allen with you. We're talking about adoption for the moment. We're going to get into the show business part of it, which is extremely extensive. Bruce is going to have to come back to even finish all this stuff out.
So next to the thing that says Travis Kelce's mother. This is not Travis Kelce's mother. This is Sharon.
No, it's not. But
she'll cross her legs for you, and you'll know it's Sharon.
At any particular rate, as a youngster, your mother got you enrolled with the Lane Bryant modeling agency. That's how it all started. But you had a propensity towards show business as a youngster anyway.
Always. I was making faces in the mirror, and they realized I was happy when I was performing. So I was a child actor, never a child star. We'd be having this conversation in rehab. I was a child actor and a model, and I had a Lane Bryant gig. They were not Lane Bryant, which is now gone. Was a plus-sized women's fashions. I guess there were not enough fat women in America. They were looking for fat kids, so they were starting a children's line, and I was the child model.
You must have been
Charming Chubs.
Charming Chubs. Oh, that's interesting to know. Hey, on my resume, Charming Chubs, your first line.
That was.
When did the writing begin for you? When
the acting dried up. When I was always acting, but I had a deep voice and I was heavy, and I looked older than I was, and I was auditioning opposite people who were authentically much older than I was, and I would play, in summer stock I'd play character parts, but that's because it was cheaper than getting an actual actor of that ilk. So but when I began going up against them, I realized this was never going to happen. And I developed a talent for writing while I was in high school, and I just kept doing it. And my parents were thrilled because they figured I would have an alternative to acting, something to fall back on. Because they said, "Oh yeah, write for newspapers; they'll never die." Oh no.
Oh yeah.
So I majored in journalism and theater at the Ohio State University and got a job at the Chicago Tribune when I got out writing about show business, basically.
Yeah, and which is a city I lived in for a number of years. I lived right on Michigan Avenue.
Me too.
You know, I lived at 535 North Michigan Avenue, which was where Nancy Reagan grew up, in that building with her mother and her stepfather. I loved Chicago.
Loyal Davis. I worked for the Trib. I knew them all.
Yeah. Well, that's where you began getting to meet celebrities like your dear friend, Bette Midler.
Yes, who in Chicago.
Tommy, let's put up that picture I have. I believe it's of Mrs. Kelsey. Isn't that Bette there?
Yes. Oh, that was heavier then, believe it or not. Yes, that was. I did a play off Broadway by Spalding Gray, and she came to see it. I think that's what we were doing.
Did you guys hit it off at first?
Oh yeah, I had my friend Bud Friedman, who ran the Improv in New York.
Yes.
Called me because Bette, who was in Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway, would come down to the Improv and sing. And he said, I got this girl a booking at a club in Chicago. It was Mr. Kelly's, which was a famous nightclub at the time.
Yes.
And when there were famous nightclubs. And he said, if you like her, write about her. And I went to see it. She was the opening act for Jackie Vernon, who was a deadpan comic.
Yes.
You know, it's just, when I was young, I was unwanted. Now I'm wanted in 13 states. His whole act was like that. And so his audience, I mean, they were shocked when they saw her. But I thought she was fabulous. And I did a story on her and said, she said, that's a funny story. You're a funny writer. I said, well, you should talk more on stage. You're very funny. And she said, you got any lines? And that was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And here we are. I'm still blonde. And you
also,
I don't know. I didn't know. She's gone gray and is happy about it. Sorry?
She's a hoot to be around. I know Melissa Manchester told me she's a hoot to be around.
Yeah, she is. So is Melissa, for that matter.
Yeah.
Who's
you
wrote and there's a Funny Girl on tour playing the mother, opening in Boston on tomorrow. I just happen to know that. I follow her track.
You do? Well,
I've seen her in it, and she's wonderful. She plays the mother, and there's a terrific girl named Hannah Shankman who's playing Fanny Bryce, who's really, really good, and it's a gorgeous production.
I think I've heard of that young lady. I believe so. I'm not 100% sure.
She's really brand new because there was another girl who did it for a year, and she was Hannah was the understudy, and they've elevated her to stardom. So if you've heard about her, it's because she went on various places on the road. Maybe they wrote about it.
You collaborated. You helped write. Collaborated, yes, with Bette on a number of Broadway productions.
Yeah, well, I did all of her shows, all of her acts, and we did at the Palace, and then we were later on Divine Madness, which we filmed. That was on Broadway, and then she got obviously bigger than Broadway. I mean, Radio City in New York, but then Madison Square Garden, and as she became a movie star, and took 10 years off basically. And when she came back live in '93, we did a big tour of hockey rinks, which was revelatory for because a lot of her stuff is theater work. It's not like Hello Cleveland and it's not Madonna, with a company of dancers and spectacle, and she speaks maybe twice. No, it's Bette really relates to the audience on a very intimate level, theatrically, in a different.
Well, I think that's what really makes a performer a major success. I think no matter whether we're talking about men, women, or anybody in between, relating to the audience. If you can relate to the audience and they can relate to you, it's like when I was performing and I was opening for Engelbert and Tom and people like that, along with how many other comics in the world. I would have the house lights up. I wanted to see the audience.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring them to me.
Yeah.
I wanted them to like me. And I figured, it's so much easier to do it that way. and I really enjoyed it. People I went to high school with said, "How in the name of God can you work in front of 1,000, 1,500 people?" I said, "It's easy. As soon as I get the paycheck, the my stage fright goes away
Life's
immediately."
everything.
Oh yeah, I mean it is. But I was a ham like you. I mean, the first laugh I ever got was in Wilkes-Barre playing one of the Three Wise Men on a stage. I knelt down and I was so heavy on my knees, it hit the stage, boom, and I got a laugh, and I went, "Oh, okay, all right." But that's not where I originally wanted to be. I wanted to be an airline pilot like my dad, but my vision was already going poor while I was in the Air Force. Besides Bette, you have worked with some of the finest comedians writing for them. But by the way, what I wanted to bring up was the fact that you wrote for Bette on Carson's Next to His Last Show, which you won an Emmy for.
She won an Emmy for that one. Yeah, I didn't.
Didn't you win an Emmy for that? You were nominated.
No, we were no. She won an Emmy for performance. There used to be a variety performance Emmy, and they eliminated the category some years ago because it was really apples and oranges. I mean, you'd have Michael Jackson and Luciano Pavarotti in the same category. and
okay,
how did you judge? I mean, you can say that about anything. You can say that about how do you judge Ariana Grande against Sofia Garson in Emilia Paris? How do you judge? But because they're totally apples and oranges. But they just got rid of it because it was I don't know. They had periodic purges over at that academy. No, I won the Emmys for 2 Billy Crystal Oscar shows for writing.
Exactly, which brings me to the next question. When you know you're going to be writing for the Academy Awards, the Emmys, the Grammys, whatever the case may be, Bruce. Oh, excuse me, Mrs. Kelsey. What kind of lead time do you get, and the team you bring together, which is about what, 4 or 5 people, 6 people, and what's the lead time? And I know that you were asked the question because I have the answer here somewhere, but I remember when someone asked you, how do you write for it? And you said at first I kind of broad base it, and then I tone it down as we start getting closer to the actual event. And of course, each host is a little bit different than the next. Billy Crystal is not, say, a Robin Williams or a Whoopi Goldberg, who I love. I love Karen very, very much. I met her through Robin. And but what is the lead time for you when you find out, yeah, Bruce Vilanch is going to be writing for the Oscars this year?
Well, it depends. Most years, it's at some point they figure out who's going to produce it. That's usually over the summer, and then they begin fishing around for a host. And maybe they find a host by around October, maybe, and then you sit down with depending on who the host is, you figure out what the show is going to be like. I mean, when the host has got a talk show that's on every night, he has about a dozen writers who he's going to bring over. And so they're all going to double dip. So they're getting paid by the Oscar show and they're getting their regular salary. So there isn't a whole lot of money left over for other writers, but they bring on 1 or 2 who actually know how an award show works, as opposed to how an opening monologue works. And you liaise with the host and his people. If it's somebody who doesn't have a staff, like Hugh Jackman or James Franco, or whoever I can think of recently, almost all of them come from the world of talk shows. Ellen, Jon Stewart, Conan this year, Kimmel for several years. So that's when you figure out. Now, there used to be things that we could write ahead of time. There used to be the Governor's Awards, but they would generally, depending on how many they had, if they had 3 or 4, that would add 45 minutes to the show. So the Academy spun them off into a separate revenue stream event called the Governor's Awards, which they shoot, and they cut down to a minute of each of the honorees getting some. But it's a big deal for the Academy. It's a big night, and they make a lot of money on it, which is good because they had to have a revenue stream besides the Oscar show. So
now here's a question for you too.
But nothing really can get done until the nominations are announced. and then
Okay.
you know where you stand.
Do a lot of people who are offered the job as hosts go, no, I want nothing to do with that.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
tons. Yeah, I mean, almost everybody, because if you're good, you get an attaboy, and if you do something that screws up, it lives with you forever. You can never get rid of it, and because it's seen by so many. I mean, Sally Field, you like me, you really like me, and that was getting an award, and she finally monetized it 30 years later with a Visa commercial. But
Yeah.
they never forget. So a lot of people don't need it. First of all, if they're asking you, you are already a big, wealthy star, and you don't really, and the schedule will probably get in the way of what else you're doing.
Yeah.
So as Jimmy Kimmel said, I'm not doing it this year because I found I can't do my show every night and plan that show. And his wife was producing the Oscar show, so
Yeah.
and she was working on his show. So if they can't do it and they're married to it, it's very tough for somebody who's got a career going. And
was Bob Hope
the pool of people who make sense to host the Oscars.
Was Bob Hope the best host? Was Bob Hope the best host?
I don't know. Billy, I suppose Billy, was a full service guy. He did 8 shows and he was terrific. I loved Hope. I loved Carson. I don't know. It's hard for me because I worked on so many of them to pick out who was the best. I have favorite things. I love working with Steve Martin because he's so odd. He's wonderful and funny, but he has a bizarre perspective on the whole thing, and he is a big movie star, and everyone loves him, so he can make fun of them without any of them being upset by it because they all know him. In a way, a lot of the talk show hosts like Kimmel and Conan, everybody's been on their shows, so they know them all. So they kind of know what to expect.
Yeah.
It was a different era, right? It was Hope.
Yeah, it is. How is it writing now? Robin Williams was responsible for me getting with the Groundlings to begin with, because I kept auditioning to get in, even to take classes at the time. And finally, he made a phone call, and I got in to take some classes. And I already knew Saget. He was in my class. Costner was in my class. Barbie Benton was in my class. Nick Turturro was in my class. And so I only took it because I was doing some radio stuff and voiceovers. I knew I wasn't. I told Bud Friedman once, I said, Bud, I'm never going to be a famous actor. He said, it's about time you figured that out. And he said, and he knew my uncle, who was a comedian on Miami Beach forever, Tubby Boots. I don't know if you've ever heard of Tubby.
I've seen Tubby Boots, yes.
He was my uncle, and I love him and miss him every day of my life. Along with my mom. My mom was so precious to me, thank God for changing my name, Mom. But the bottom line is, what's it like when you're writing for Billy Crystal or you're writing for Robin Williams? Now I know the one person that I'm trying to figure out you wrote for is Steven Tyler. What did you write for Steven Tyler?
There is a Aerosmith ride at Walt Disney World, and he had a voiceover that was part of the ride, and it was also something that they used while you were waiting online. There were television screens, and he would come on and talk to you. And Aerosmith would play something while you were waiting to get on the ride, which, as you can imagine, was a wild roller coaster indoor ride,
right?
And with accompaniment by Aerosmith and lights and everything, but glyphs for you to smoke, and that's what I wrote. And I think I probably, in fact, I'm sure I wrote something for him on the Grammys when he was a presenter a couple of times. Because I wrote a bunch. As you said, I'm the EGOT of award show. I've written all those shows, and I did the Grammys for a few years, and he was. I'm sure he was on it.
You were the head writer for the Academy Awards from 2000 to 2014, I believe, Bruce.
I guess I didn't realize that because you don't get any more money. You're just a writer, and they said, "We're putting you in charge." I said, "Okay, fine." And then some years somebody else was in charge. So So, I always I view that title with amusement because it didn't make any difference really.
What's the difference though when you're writing for Robin or Whoopi or Billy or for a Lily Tomlin or Rosie O'Donnell?
Well, they're all different people, you know. I'm
Well,
fond
yeah,
of
yeah.
saying, what's the difference for Bob Mackie to design a dress for Cher or for Lizzo?
Yeah,
You're not going to put them in the same cut.
Of course not. No, but what I mean is,
or the same color or the same beading. I mean, but there is a Bob Mackie style, and he designs and it looks fabulous in each one of them. So, and Shakespeare, I'm fond of saying, wrote Titus Andronicus and the Comedy of Errors. Although some people think Titus Andronicus is a comedy of errors, but that's another thing. But you know, you have to have a lot of tools in your box. You should pardon the expression.
Yes.
In order to write, unless you're just if you're going to write this kind of stuff, and the thing is, they hand you a persona that they use or not. You have to kind of help them come up with one. But you have to pay a lot of attention to who they are and the rhythms they speak and what their body language is like. And then and the kind of thing they like to talk about. So you have to do a lot of homework about them. And then you can adapt it if you have that skill, if you're lucky, and I have been lucky, that you can do it for different people. And that's actually the fun of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be weird to write for Robin though, because man, he's like, whoa,
well,
he's like,
as you said, I'd write material and throw it in the cage, and then we would later on, go over it. And I was having writer, Robin would embroider every night on stage, and finally he would come up with what he wanted to do. He would lead himself into a hunk that he knew worked, but he always had something new to throw into there, and his stage persona was quick and and that would kind of knock them out. So, but he was brilliant. I mean, he could only do that because he was genuinely brilliant. And the brilliance was he really thought it was only when he was totally coked out that he could do that. But in fact, he stopped doing any of that, and he was still brilliant doing all of that.
You know what he said, though? Well, he didn't say it alone. I've heard other comedians say this, and you've probably heard it as well. But I heard Robin say it once. He said, it gets to a point in your career, you become so famous that when you go on stage, are they really laughing at my jokes, or are they laughing because I'm Robin Williams?
Well, yeah, of course. Now, the Bud Friedman I was telling you about earlier, who you knew, I had met through his client, Freddie Prinz. And he had called me and said, I got this very funny guy, and he's going to open at Mr. Kelly's. It's like a year before Bette. And I went, and he was wonderful. He opened for Jonah Jones, who was a jazz vibraphone player, and the audience hated him. They were not there for him. They wanted to hear Jonah Jones, and it was awful. Then he went back to LA. But I interviewed him, and we got on, and he went back to New York. And a year later, he was in LA, and he got Chico and the Man, and suddenly he was a huge television star. And he went back to Kelly's as a headliner, and he came out and he did the show. And it was word for word the exact same act he had done.
And I bet he hit a home run.
And huge. He screamed the moment they hit the stage. They cheered, they laughed. He came off stage and he looked at me and he said, "You're the only person who knows what I did." You and I are the only ones who know.
Yes.
Because I'm sure they're the people at Skelly, they've been turned over in the staff, and they probably hadn't paid much attention to him the first time. So to your point, exactly right. It's what Robin says is absolutely true. You have a tremendous head start when they've come to see you. They're already there. They're in your corner. You don't have to prove it to them.
Yeah. It's really weird. Now, Tubby used to do some of the craziest things on stage that you cannot do today, because it'd be considered a little really avant-garde and really out there, like Lord Buckley. I mean, he was. Exactly. Lord Buckley was. I mean, it's just not going to happen anymore. We're joined today by Bruce Vilanch, rather. Excuse me. I'm sorry. He's portraying Travis Kelce's mother today. Try to pick up a few extra shingles. Gary Allen with you here on Main Street, and we're so happy that Bruce has joined us, and he will be back. I promise you, he will be back, because he's got to be back, because there's so much to his career. It's absolutely.
I'm selling a book. I've got to plug it. I got to be somewhere along the line.
I didn't know you were doing a book.
You didn't know? Oh my God!
No.
Well, clearly I have some spade work to do. I no, I during COVID I was on podcasts, a lot of podcasts like this, but most of them were people much younger than you and I, and they had encountered a lot of crap that I wrote for the television in the 70s. The Star Wars Holiday Special was #1, and the Paul Lynde Halloween Special, the Brady Bunch Variety Hour, and they would ask me. They encountered all these things on YouTube, and they'd never heard of them, and they said, "How did this happen? This awful thing. Were you involved in this? How did this happen? Who said yes to this? And have they paid their debt to society?" And I thought, well, there's a book in this, How I Wrote the Worst Shows in History and Lived. And so I wrote a book about that. It's called It Seemed Like a Bad Idea at the Time. And it covers that and a couple of disasters, non-televised, Broadway and Vegas and places like that. And it is on Amazon pre-order now. It drops March 4th officially in bookstores near you. I hope there are bookstores near you. And and so, I'm tub thumping. I'm going all over the place, flogging, because it's a very funny book, but it really does explain a lot of how things work. That stuff that you, in reflection, you say, this never should have been born, was born.
Besides your brilliant writing ability, you also are a songwriter. I want to touch on that. You've written for Bette, obviously. You've also you wrote for Michael Feinstein and Dianna Ross, who was on the awards show last night.
Yeah, great.
Now, I have a question for you about her, because when I lived in Las Vegas, when I was opening for this one and that one, and she was there, I heard some interesting stories, and maybe you can tell me that it's all a bunch of BS, that you don't look at her, you don't talk to her, you stay away from her, and if you're caught staring at her, you get fired immediately. Did you counter any of that with her?
No, and I've heard that about a million different people. I've heard that about, I was on tour with Luther Vandross and Anita Baker, and I heard that about both of them. Really? And neither of which was true for me. I mean, there are some people who, when they're starting out, they're insecure and they want to keep their focus, and so they want to separate themselves from the tumult backstage, which I understand. But and sometimes they just know that they are the object of intense interest, and they again want to feel they're in a space where they can perform, and let the paying audience look at them, but the people who are behind them know. So I don't believe that's true. I used to joke about it with her. In fact, I ran into her on a plane once, and there was a book that Randy Taraborelli had written called "Call Me Miss Ross," which was all about her alleged misbehavior. And I said to her, I went up to her and I said, "You never told me to call you Miss Ross." And she said, "I've been meaning to speak to you about that."
Now, I mean, she was not like that. I met her when I'm in the movie Mahogany, which was filmed in Chicago, and I play a role, and I had a bigger part, but it was cut because Berry Gordy took over. He fired the director, Tony Richardson, no less, and he took over, and he said, the picture's got to get out of Chicago into Rome. Chicago's not pretty. And so he chopped the script, and she got her character into Rome faster. So most of my scenes went away. One scene remains. Anyway, that's when I met her. And then some years later, I did her, when she left Motown, we did an act called An Evening with Dianna Ross, and I was brought in to write it. And that became a big show at the Palace on Broadway, and toured, and was an NBC special. And it was her first thing away from the Motown machine. And we've been friendly ever since. And I keep coming in and writing and not writing and hanging out. You also wrote a song called "Where Is My Man," which was made famous by Eartha Kitt. For those of you who may remember, wonderful singer. But the one that I got the biggest kick out of was "Sex Over the Phone," the Village People. Of course, why not? They're going through.
That was with the same collaborator, Jacques Morali, who created the Village People. when he York as a young French guy, and
Yeah.
went to the young French gay guy and went to the village and saw all of these gay guys dressed up as macho stereotypes, and he wrote Macho Man and started the group. And then Alan Carr, who we mentioned earlier, had an idea, which is in my book actually, about a movie starring them called Can't Stop the Music, and I wrote the first few drafts of it. And and Jacques and I got friendly on that, and then Jacques had the show in Paris at the Crazy Horse, which was a famous nightclub where these Amazonian women come out topless and they would sing, but they were all lip synced by famous people. And he said, "I have Elta. Elta is going to do a song for the Crazy Horse." So
you do that very well, my friend. Yeah.
Yeah, my men. And so he sent me the melody, and I wrote a lyric to "Where's My Man? I'm looking for a rich guy." Obviously, that was Eartha the Gold Digger. And he said, "Okay, I think this works. We have to audition it for her on the phone." So we called her, and I started thinking, "I don't want to be alone. Where is my baby?" And on and on. And she listened. She said, "That's very good." She said, "You do a very good impression of me. If you're doing it and getting paid, I will kill you." That was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. We recorded the song. It was done at the Crazy Horse by a 7-foot tall blonde woman with a huge rack. I mean, really, birds could land on her chest. It was amazing. And she lip synced it in Eartha's voice, which was pretty hilarious because she was like, "I think what we did on voice going like this." So, and then Jacques got a deal, a French record label, and that became a global disco hit. Every place but America where they weren't playing disco on the radio at the time. So we have gold records from all over the world, and we did an album called "Where's My Man?" and it brought Eartha back. Eartha was living at a nice house in Connecticut with her daughter, and thought she'd never work again because she had been blackballed after her incident with LBJ. Yeah. So it brought her back, and she had that career for the rest of her life, and of course it was the only. She couldn't play clubs and concerts and do disco music because she didn't have that big an act, and she didn't want to work for tape. So she would do the one song in her club act. But she was a fabulous, truly fabulous character. She was brilliant, and of course we know outspoken, but so crazy down to earth. Not her persona was so at odds with who she was when you were with her.
Right.
She said, when you sang "Where's My Man?" I thought to myself, this is really more his story than mine.
You were also in the. That had to be fabulous with her. I remember the LBJ thing going on. I do remember that very well. You also were in the tour company of Hairspray.
I did the tour, the first national tour, and I played Broadway for a year. Yeah, I shaved my beard.
Really?
I was a housewife. Yes, it was great. It was fabulous. It's a great show. Even 8 times a week. Even if you don't feel like doing it, you go in and you hear that audience. They're there to party, and it's so much fun to do. And it's fun to do that role in particular because the only break you get is when you're on stage. Because when she's off stage, she's getting a new wig and new shoes and bigger tits and all of that. So it's pretty great.
Yeah. It is what it is. Bruce Vilanch joining us here on Main Street. Gary Allen with you. Bruce is portraying Travis Kelce's mother this afternoon for us. And it's always a pleasure to have Travis Kelce's mom on. Yeah. I imagine, Mrs. Kelce, you're picking the Eagles this weekend, being as though your son used to play for the Eagles. Although your other son is with Kansas City. So, you're probably torn a little bit.
I would imagine she's terribly, terribly torn. But, what are you going to do?
Hey, listen, my mother sat in the seats. My mother sat in the seats of Super Bowl III. My brother's playing for the Baltimore Colts against the New York Jets. And every 5 minutes, she would turn to my father and say, "Now, which team does Michael play for?" And finally, my sister said, "Mom, the blue uniforms, The white ones are the New York Jets. The blue ones are the Baltimore Colts. That's who your son plays for. You know, she never got it really straight.
My mother used to tell people I won an Oscar for writing the Emmys. I said, you can't win an Oscar for writing the Emmys. I won an Emmy for writing the Oscars. Oh, it's also confusing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Or when I was in
First world problems.
When I was interning for and then later worked for Larry King, every once in a while I'd be on with Larry. We'd kibitz back and forth about 3 o'clock in the morning. My mother'd be up listening to the show. I'd go, Mom, why don't you go to bed? You know, but then she would call in every once in a while, and Larry would recognize her voice. And he finally said to her one night, it was like 4:30 in the morning, I think it was, or something like that. And he said, Beth, go to bed. You shouldn't be up. Go to bed at your age.
I actually wrote for him once. He hosted NATO, which is not the NATO you're thinking of. It was the National Association of Theater Owners convention in Las Vegas, which is a big thing. And I wrote, he was the host, and I wrote a monologue, I think, for him, and he was hysterical. We were going over the jokes, and I said, this is like Phil Silvers in Top Banana. I mean, yeah, that's a beauty. Okay, we'll keep that one. I thought, well, suddenly he's a comic, you know? I mean, it was so but I had a great time. We did have a lot and then I was on his show a bunch of times after that. So he
was something else. Another Bernadette Duncan Peters. She produced a show in Washington, D.C., who was a very good friend of mine. We've got about 5 minutes left in the program. I got a few questions to ask you before we go. Plug your book again, would you please?
Yes, it is called It Seemed Like a Bad Idea at the Time. How I Wrote the Worst Shows in Television and a few other things and lived. And it's on Amazon, pre-order, and drops March 4th in the real world.
What was the worst show ever on TV?
Oh, I don't know. There are so many bad ones, but the Star Wars Holiday Special is the one they remember because it's the one that had the most legs, because Star Wars never died. At the time, there had been one Star Wars movie, and George was preparing The Empire Strikes Back. And so it had not become the Scientology of the nerds. You know, they had to discover it on the internet. And it's also where they discovered the special, because CBS never reran it. And George tried to buy up all the copies. But then the internet happened, and that became impossible. So that's the most frequently cited one. And also because there is an audience of young people who are fascinated by everything Star Wars. And they can't believe that thing actually happened.
Absolutely. Real quick, before we get to these final couple of questions, I know you worked with my dear friend Will Schreiner on Hollywood Squares a couple of times.
Yeah, we had him. I was on Squares, I was the head writer, and I was to the left of Whoopi, if that's possible. So Will was on a bunch, and I was on his show a couple of times with my mother. I brought him a Mother's Day show.
Really?
I brought my mother, and we sat there with Zsa Zsa and Francesca Hilton.
Oh, Zsa Zsa. She was the last one, I think, to pass away, was Zsa Zsa. Bruce, you have been in the business for a very, very long time. You've gone through the ups and downs of the business. You've seen people come. You've seen people go. You've seen people kill their own careers. What would you like to change about the business to make it a little bit easier for people in comparison to what they have to go through today?
I think we've done that. I think that the internet has done that. I mean, people say, how do I get into business? I said 2 words, Randy Rainbow. Create yourself and put yourself on the internet. Write something funny, get it shot, something even short and funny. There are people sitting in every corporate office of every entertainment entity who are paid to just troll the internet looking for new talent. Yeah. When we started, you had to actually write a script and try to get people to read it, or you had to get a reel. It was, you had to sleep with an agent. I mean, all those things have been eliminated realistically. Now, sleeping with an agent, you can get him canceled. So, but the web is there for you to use.
Yeah,
you are aspiring. Maybe it's the most aspirational place on the planet, and it's where stars come out of there. I mean, ask any of those TikTok people. Stars come out of the internet. Do it.
It's amazing. I guess nobody's discovered me yet because I'm still here doing what I do.
Well, we're there's also a generational gap. I'm constantly being reminded.
One last question, and we got about 2 minutes. Well, not even that, maybe 30 seconds. When it comes down to the brass tacks, looking back on your career, what advice would you give a young Bruce Vilanch on everything you've learned in between?
I'd say don't be hard on yourself. Just keep going. Stop self-criticizing. Stop wasting time self-analyzing, and just go forward with it. Give it a twirl. The worst thing that happens is it doesn't work, and you come back again for another thing. I mean, don't make yourself crazy, and use the internet.
Absolutely. We've been very honored to have Mr. Bruce Vilanch on today, portraying Travis Kelce's mom. He's a two-time Emmy Award winning writer. He's written for so many different things. And as I said, I think the next book should be entitled From Paterson, New Jersey to Broadway to LA. He is the incomparable Mr. Bruce Vilanch. And thank you so much for joining me, Bruce. Stay right there. We're going to wrap up the show, and then I want to talk to you right after the show. Okay. So if you stay right there. And to all of you out there for joining us on today's program, I thank you very, very much. And until we meet again next time, please take care of yourself, and God bless.
All right.
All right, Bruce, did you enjoy the show?
Oh, yeah, it was fun.